Advocates for Service Animal Partners wants you to know that a service animal is a dog trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. Disabled individuals accompanied by our service dogs must be allowed in restaurants, hotels, retail stores, healthcare facilities, taxi cabs, or any other place the public is invited. For more information about the rights and responsibilities of service animal handlers and the businesses we patronize, please visit serviceanimals.info.
Hello, I am Marilyn Schaefer, Secretary of Advocates for Service Animal Partners, and your moderator for this webinar. First, a little housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. Participation in this webinar implies an agreement to and authorization for such recording in compliance with state and federal laws. The information provided during this teleseminar is intended for educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. This webinar is closed captioned for the hearing impaired and hard of hearing. All participants are muted and cannot unmute themselves. Questions should be put in chat, and the moderator will monitor the chat and ask the questions. If for some reason you cannot access chat, you can send an email to advocacy411@gmail.com with the word question in the subject line. All questions should be relevant to the subject matter being presented at that. Hello, I am Marilyn. In compliance with state and federal laws for educational purposes only and should not be construed.
Yes, sorry.
This webinar is closed captioned for the hearing impaired and hard of hearing. All participants are muted and cannot unmute themselves. Questions should be put in chat, and the moderator will monitor the chat and ask the questions. If for some reason you cannot access chat, you can send an email to advocacy411@gmail.com with the word question in the subject line. All questions should be relevant to the subject matter being presented at that time. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and they will be answered at the end of each section. Advocates for Service Animal Partners, or ASAP, is the only organization dedicated exclusively to supporting, enhancing, and protecting the civil rights of disabled individuals who use service animals to mitigate their disability and live full, productive, and independent lives. ASAP operates ASAP 211, a 24-hour information and resource hotline to provide service animal handlers and businesses real-time, on-demand intervention and mediation of challenges faced as the result of the choice to use a service dog. You can access the hotline by calling 855-ASAP-211. That's 855-272-7211. ASAP also provides policy-making services, implementation of standard operating procedures, and in-service training on a fee-for-service basis. For more information, please call the ASAP office at 386-272-7411 or email advocacy411@gmail.com. Marian Guizdala is the founder of Advocates for Service Animal Partners. Marian possesses a Master of Science degree in mental health counseling with additional graduate study in rehabilitation counseling and spent 15 years in private practice as a hypnotherapist. Marian is a published author, accomplished public speaker, and experienced workshop facilitator in the areas of psychosocial aspects of disability, service animal advocacy and policy, and legal issues related to the use of service animals. Marian has been blind since 1983 as the result of retinitis pigmentosa and has been a guide dog handler since 1987. He is currently working his fifth guide dog, a blue Merle smooth coat collie from Freedom Guide Dogs for the Blind. Marion has been involved in several high-profile cases, both as a complainant and an advocate. He has been instrumental in creating civil rights legislation in several states and is a recognized leader in the blindness and service dog handlers movements. Marion blends his knowledge and real-life experience with a touch of humor to help others overcome their perceived limitations, as well as underscore the need for increased awareness and more effective enforcement of the laws designed to allow all citizens, including those who are disabled, to more fully participate in society on terms of equality. His clients have included Hillsborough County, Hillsborough Area Regional Transit Authority, Miami-Dade County, St. Petersburg College, the University of South Florida, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, Qatar, Johns Hopkins University Hospital, the Illinois Attorney General's Office, and the Wichita Transit Authority. I give you Marion Gwizdala.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thanks to everyone who's joining this webinar today. So our goal today is to give you a brief overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act and help you to understand how the ADA relates to your business as it pertains to service animal handlers. This program is going to be just a little over 1 hour. The last program was 1 hour and 9 minutes, actually. So we hope you will stay all the way to the end of this program. If there are questions that are not answered during this webinar, you can either send me an email to answer those questions, but I also want to let you know that, as Marilyn said, we do provide policymaking consultation services, standard operating procedure implementation, and in-service training to businesses to develop policies, practices, and procedures as they relate specifically to your business and to the industry that your business is in. So let's talk a little bit about the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law.
Marion Gwizdala.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'll get it right.
The joys of technology. So the ADA was is a law that was promoted and advocated for by a couple of distinguished people. One of them was Justin Dart, and Justin Dart is known as the father of the ADA. It was also advocated by Judy Heumann. Judy recently passed away at the age of 75. Judy had polio and used a wheelchair and is considered the mother of the disability rights movement. The ADA is the result of a bill that was introduced into Congress by Senator Tom Harkin and was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush.
And now I sign legislation which takes a sledgehammer to another wall, one which has for too many generations separated Americans with disabilities from the freedom they could glimpse but not grasp. And once again we rejoice as this barrier falls, proclaiming together, we will not accept, we will not excuse, we will not tolerate discrimination in America.
So the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal civil rights act which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. The act has 4 basic chapters, or what are called titles, and each title has a specific focus and is enforced by specific agencies. So Title I is the part of the ADA which deals with employment, and is under the jurisdiction of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Title II prohibits discrimination in the provision of services by a public entity. A public entity is a governmental agency, so it could be a state, a county, a city, any municipality, but it does not apply to the federal government. The federal government is under the under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Title III deals with private entities that provide public accommodations, and we're going to focus mostly today upon Titles II and III. Title IV deals with telecommunications, which is not going to at all be a focus today. And Title V has a couple of provisions that we're going to look at. Title V contains what are known as the miscellaneous provisions. So again, we're going to focus mostly upon Title II and Title III today. So basically what the Americans with Disabilities Act provides is that public entities and private entities that provide public accommodations are required to modify their policies, practices, and procedures to allow individuals with disabilities the same access as is provided to people who are not disabled. The only exception would be if the presence of the disabled individual would cause an undue burden, which is a significant amount of money. So generally, individuals accompanied by service animals do not cause an undue burden. Or if the presence of the individual, and in this case, the presence of the individual and their service animal, poses what is known as a direct threat. A direct threat is a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a reasonable modification of policies, practices, and procedures. So what is a place of public accommodation? A place of public accommodation is a private company that provides services and goods to individuals, to the public, and to which the public is invited. The ADA, under Section 302 of the Act, outlines 12 broad categories of what is considered a place of public accommodation. And they include such things as an inn, a hotel, a motel, or other place of lodging, restaurants, bars, lounges, and other places that serve food and drink, offices of a healthcare provider, offices of an attorney, an accountant, retail stores, and fundamentally, everything can be grouped into the heading of any place the public is invited. So if the public is invited into the place, the private company, then it is considered a place of public accommodation. Religious organizations and private clubs, however, are not governed by the ADA. They are exempt from the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Private clubs are organizations which generally have some sort of a meaningful condition for membership and whose facilities, services, and goods are only available to those people who are members and their guests. However, if a church, a religious organization, or a private club opens their doors to the public, now this is not for their worship services, for instance, but if they open their doors, say, as a food pantry and invite the public to come into their food pantry, or if a private club opens their doors to a graduation ceremony and the public is invited to that graduation ceremony, at that point in time, those places then, even though they are not under the auspices of the Americans with Disabilities Act generally, do become, during those events, places of public accommodation, because the public is being invited in, and as a result, they must then
modify their policies, practices, and procedures to allow individuals with disabilities the same access as other people are provided. That includes allowing service animals. Now, though there are some stores which say they are membership clubs, such stores as BJ's, and Costco's, and Sam's, and other private organizations that call themselves membership clubs or wholesale clubs, the membership does not have a specific set of guidelines under which an individual must meet in order for them to become a member. The only qualification to become a member of those sorts of wholesale clubs is that they pay the fee. So as such, they are not private clubs. However, such places as the Elks, the Moose, the Masons, the Knights of Columbus, Veterans of Foreign War, places of like that are considered private clubs because they have meaningful guidelines that must be met in order to become a member. So Advocates for Service Animal Partners is an organization that has two primary purposes. One is to advocate for people who are disabled and use service animals. And the other part of it is to provide training and implementation of policies and protocol and in-service training to companies. So again, if those are services that can be offered to you, we are here to support you in that in many ways. And our services are provided to companies on a fee-for-service basis. So we also provide, in support of that mission, we provide a 24-hour hotline for service animal handlers. So if they have any issues trying to access a place of public accommodation and need some support, guidance, intervention, mediation, we provide those services to disabled people free of charge. They are pro bono, and they can access that by calling our hotline, which is 855 ASAP 211 or 855 272 7211. So what exactly is a service animal? The title of this webinar is this a service animal? So a service animal is defined by the implementing regulations of the Americans with Disabilities Act as any dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. That includes a visual disability, a sensory disability, a physical disability, a psychiatric disability, intellectual disabilities, and other mental disabilities. So those are the tasks that a service animal can perform. So again, a service animal is any dog individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. So we are going to ask the question. We're going to put up a slide. And for those of you who are blind and cannot see the slide, this is a slide of a pig, a parrot, a peacock. All right, a peacock. I knew it was a bird, and a cat. And the question is this a service animal? So we have a poll, and the poll has three answers: yes, no, and maybe. So access the poll, and we'll have 30 seconds to vote.
Okay. We had 83% said no, and 17% said maybe.
Okay. Well, as far as the ADA is concerned, the 83% that said no is the correct answer we were looking for. However, we will be discussing a little bit so that later on some other provisions. And so those 17% that answered maybe, you're not completely incorrect. However, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the correct answer is no. So the Americans with Disabilities Act and its implementing regulations specifically say other species of animals, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are not service animals for the purposes of this definition. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and again, we'll discuss some of the details of state law in a little bit, but under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a service animal is only a dog. And there will be one exception, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. The work or tasks that are performed by the service animal must be directly related to the individual's disability. So examples of work or tasks that the animal can be trained to perform include, but they're not limited to, assisting individuals who are blind or have low vision with navigation and other tasks, providing physical support and assistance for balance and stability to people who have mobility impairments, alerting individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to the presence of sounds or people, providing non-violent, that's important, non-violent protection or rescue work, pulling a wheelchair, assisting an individual during a seizure, alerting individuals to the presence of allergens, retrieving items such as medicine, the telephone, or dropped items, helping people with psychiatric or neurological disabilities by preventing or interrupting impulsive or destructive behaviors. So I also want to point out that the closed captioning to the video that we just saw used the term qualified service animal. And the reason that that term was used is because this video was actually extracted from Alberta, Canada, and Canadian law uses that term qualified service animal. Their laws are slightly different than ours in the United States. The ADA and its implementing regulations do not use that term. They only refer to it as a service animal. The crime deterrent effects of the presence of the animal or the provision of emotional support, well-being, comfort, or companionship are specifically not defined as tasks under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So those are not trained tasks. Those are results simply of the innate presence of the service animal. So the provision of emotional support, well-being, and comfort are not tasks under the Americans with Disabilities Act and do not qualify the animal as a service animal. Okay, so we're going to take another poll here, and we're going to put up a slide now of a miniature horse. And again, the question is this a service animal? The answers are yes, no, and maybe. About 30 seconds to answer the question. Miniature horse, is it a service animal? Yes, no, or maybe.
Okay, we have 70% said yes, 10% said no, and 20% said maybe.
Okay. So the correct answer is, because we don't know anything about it except it's a miniature horse. So at this point, the answer to that question is a resounding maybe. So and we'll talk about why it was maybe. So the Americans with Disabilities Act also includes miniature horses as service animals. So miniature horses can be service animals. That's why the answer to the question is maybe. And we're going to go into more detail about how we actually know whether a service animal is a service animal to answer the question yes or no, rather than just as maybe. So as far as a miniature horse is concerned, the business, the place of public accommodation must be able to accommodate for the size, weight of the miniature horse. The handler must have sufficient control over the miniature horse. The miniature horse must be housebroken, and the miniature horse cannot compromise legitimate safety requirements necessary for the safe operation of the business. So how do we determine if the miniature horse is a yes or a no, rather than just a maybe? And this is true whether it's a horse or a dog. So how do we determine if a service animal, if a dog or a horse is actually a service animal? And we're looking at this definition again that says it's any dog, and now we know that it could be a horse as well, individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. So given that definition, we want to ascertain what is known as credible assurance. We want to ask some questions, and we want to determine whether the answers to the questions are credible or believable. And not only the answers to the questions, but also the behavior of the dog. So there are two questions which a place of public accommodation are allowed to ask in order to determine whether an animal is a service animal or not. The first question is this a service animal required because of your disability? Because the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination based upon disability. So the first question you want to know is this a service animal required because of a disability? Only individuals with disabilities have the right to be accompanied by a service animal. So someone who is not disabled can't take my guide dog, my service dog, into a place of public accommodation if that person is not disabled. The second question is, based upon that definition, what work or tasks has the dog been trained to perform? Again, the work or task must be directly related to the individual's disability. And are the answers to those two questions credible, believable? And again, the other element of that is the behavior of the dog believable, that it has been trained to do work or perform tasks? So if the person is answering the questions and the answers to the questions are believable, and the dog is sitting quietly or laying down next to the individual and is behaving itself, then you could have credible assurance. But even if the answers to the questions are believable, they're answering them correctly, but the behavior of the dog is such that it's running around, it's greeting other people, it's barking, it's wrapping around people's legs with its leash, it's not under control of the handler, then it's not believable that that dog is a trained service animal. So again, that is what we want to look at as credible assurance. Now, you cannot ask about the nature of the disability, and you cannot ask for a demonstration of what the dog is trained to do, because sometimes that dog is only going to react and do its job under certain circumstances, such as when a person is having a seizure. So you cannot ask for a demonstration of what the dog is trained to do. There is no documentation that can be required. In fact, My guidance generally is if someone is showing you identification, to pretty much ask them that they put their identification cards away, because the Department of Justice says that no documentation can be required, and that documentation in and of itself is not proof that the dog has been trained. Now, we're going to be viewing a video in a little bit that's going to help you underscore that particular issue. So again, the ADA says that documentation of any kind, ID cards, certification, the wearing of vests or other gear, are not sufficient to demonstrate that the dog is a trained service dog. So what we're going to do now is we're going to help you understand this credible assurance a little bit better. We're going to play a video. It's 2 minutes and 30 seconds long, and I want you to pay close attention to this video and the questions that are being asked and the answers that are being given. And I'm going to give you some hints about this right now. So first of all, is the person giving credible assurance that the dog is trained to perform a task? The person begins by stating that the dog is a service animal and what it provides is emotional support. So we've already learned that emotional support and companionship are not trained tasks under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The person presents identification. The identification comes from an organization called United States Service Dog Registry. Sounds pretty official, but it is a, basically, it's a scam. It's an organization that provides identification cards and registers people's dogs as service animals without any verification that the dog has been trained, other than asking, has your dog been trained as a service animal? Has it undergone at least 120 hours of training? And all you got to do is answer yes to that question. And that's one of the things that this person says. She says the dog underwent 120 hours of training in order to be registered with the United States Service Dog Registry. She's asked many times what kind of tasks or work the dog is trained to perform, and all she ever says was the dog provides emotional support, in spite of the fact that she was given several opportunities to describe and examples of the type of work that the dog could have been trained to do. Okay, so here we go. We're going to play this video and pay attention to the lack of credible assurance this person offers.
Hi.
The dog, it's a service animal, it's fine.
She's a service animal. I have her card right
I
here.
can get that online.
Okay, but it's not.
I'm allowed 2 questions. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, okay? One, is the dog needed for physical or mental disability?
She is, yes.
What is
I have
the dog,
PTSD.
okay, what is the dog specifically trained
Because
to do?
I have PTSD, she provides emotional support.
No. That's
She's
not
registered.
specifically trained to do anything. I've got the ADA rules right here.
Okay, but she is, and I do have a right for psychiatric reasons to have her registered as a service dog.
Okay. But a service dog is trained to do a specific act, i.e. it senses an anxiety attack, it licks your cheek.
Okay, and that's what I told you. I told you I have PTSD,
You told
and
me
she provides support for
you
that.
told me she provides emotion. That's not a training. It's not trained.
Okay, she is. She went through 120 hours of training, and that's how I have her registered through that USSDR.
What specific act is the dog
I
trained
explained to you
perform?
what specific
No,
act
didn't.
she's
You
performed
said
to
it
train.
provides emotional support. I'm saying what
I'm
specific
showing
act?
you, she has a
Okay,
service
ma'am,
dog this.
I'm
I'm
gonna
showing
tell-
you she is
This
registered
is
with
from
the
the Department of
USSDR.
Justice.
I've brought her in here before. I have PTSD. It's on file. She's went through 120 hours of training to be trained as a service dog.
Okay. Or emotional support therapy.
She's not an emotional support dog.
You told me she was.
I told you what she provides is emotional support. I told you what she provides is emotional support. She is a registered service dog with the USSDR. I have her card right here to prove it.
The dog must be trained to take
She's went through 120 hours of training. That's how she's registered with the USSDR.
Let me finish this, okay?
Okay.
To train to take a specific action when needed to assist the person with a disability, i.e., a person with disabilities has a dog to alert him when the blood sugar reaches higher levels. A person with depression may have a dog that's trained to remind her to take medication. With epilepsy, may be trained to detect the onset of a seizure. Epilepsy. Okay.
But no, what she is trained for is emotional support.
That's not.
Because I have PTSD, I am allowed to have her registered because of psychiatric reasons. She has went through the 120 hours of training. That's how she's registered with USSDR.
You realize a full-fledged ADA.
Okay, so it just keeps going on and on like this, and eventually she was denied access. Now, I want to say that she went to the media grabbed a hold of this, and unfortunately, the media, being very uninformed, sided with her and listened to her, and the media villainized this organization. This is One OK Field. It's a baseball field in Oklahoma, and I want to assure people that if your business contracts with us, and we provide you with policies and practices and procedures and do your training, we are going to be your representative to the media to explain to them the reality of what a service animal actually is. The rights and responsibilities of service animal handlers are not absolute. With every right that an individual has, we all have concomitant, we all have responsibilities that go along with those rights. So for instance, we do have the right of free speech, but we also have the responsibility to not slander or libel someone, because that is the limitation of our right. So you as a business and we as a service animal handler have the responsibility to do certain things, and you as a business have a right to exclude a service animal under certain conditions and circumstances. And we're going to be talking about that soon. And we're going to be talking about how you can protect yourself from the media and from lawsuits should you need to exclude a service animal from your place of business. So let's talk about the responsibilities, first of all, of a place of public accommodation. So the first thing is that individuals with service animals are not required to comply with policies and practices and procedures that are applicable to pets and pet owners. Service animals are not pets. So those rules, those regulations that apply to pets are not applicable to individuals with disabilities accompanied by service animals. So such things as in a hotel, a pet-friendly hotel may have specific rooms and floors on which they allow pets. Service animal handlers cannot be required to stay on a specific floor or occupy a specific room in a hotel. Again, some pet-friendly hotels will require pet owners to sign a form that says they understand the pet policy. We are not required as service animal handlers to sign such a form. To require us to do that would be considered discriminatory. Those pet policies also prohibit pets from going to such places as the pool deck, the fitness center, or the restaurants or bars. Service animals are allowed on pool decks and fitness centers, in places that serve food and drink. So those rules, those policies are not applicable to individuals with disabilities accompanied by service animals. So what are the responsibilities? I said that we have the right to be accompanied by our service animal, but we also have certain responsibilities. One of the major primary responsibilities is that the animal must be under the direct control of the handler. Direct control means that it is kept on a leash, a tether, or some sort of harness under which there is a direct contact with the handler. The only exception to that are dogs which need to be off leash in order to perform their duties. Okay, so for instance, a person who has post-traumatic stress may have a dog which enters into a room, say like a conference room, goes through the room and clears the room, clearing the room not of people, but clearing the room, making sure that it's safe and isn't going to trigger some sort of a post-traumatic stress incident. In those circumstances, the dog is allowed off leash, goes into the room, it goes through, it checks the room, comes back to the handler, and at that point in time, the handler then puts it back on a leash. A dog that's trained to pick up dropped items, say someone uses a wheelchair and they drop a pen, and the pen happens to roll away further than the leash is able to extend, the individual is then allowed to let the dog off the leash so the dog can retrieve the item, bring it back to the handler, but at that point in time then is then returned to the leash. The dog should not bark or growl if unprovoked, and that's an important element if unprovoked. In other words, a dog that barks or growls at someone who steps on its foot or tail is being provoked. And someone who, you'd be surprised how many people, those of us who are service animal handlers, know that, and mostly it's adults who bark at our dogs. It's usually not the children, it's the adults that are barking at our dogs. And if that provokes the dog and it barks, then the dog is being provoked, and the barking does not constitute a dog that's out of control. Also, a dog that barks as an alert function. So there may be a dog that's actually trained to vocalize or bark as part of its training. So it's not that the dog is out of control, but it is part of its training. Now that barking should not be disruptive. So if the dog is continuously barking, say in a movie theater and disturbing people in the movie theater, then the dog can be excluded. The dog must be housebroken. The dog may not block an aisle or any other way obstruct the passage of people walking through. Must not pose a direct threat. Remember, a direct threat is a significant risk to the health or safety of others. It cannot be eliminated by a modification of policies, practices, and procedures. So the dog, in keeping with that direct threat, the dog must not be allowed to sit on the seat of a restaurant or be fed from the table. The dog may not be allowed in areas of food preparation. So we're not allowed to take our dogs under any circumstances into the food prep area of a restaurant, like the kitchen. Now, that does not include buffets, and it does not include circumstances under which the food is actually prepared at the table. The dog you may be required to not allow your dog to be unattended in a hotel room, because again, it's our requirement that we keep our dog under direct control of the handler. And if the dog is unattended in a hotel room, then it's not under the direct control. Now, just because it says they may not doesn't mean they shall not. There's a difference between may and shall. So if a hotel says, oh, it's okay for you to leave your dog unattended in your room, then a person should be allowed to do that. Now, the hotel could say, well, your dog is barking and it's disruptive, so no, you cannot leave it unattended. So again, it's a may and not a shall, and it's up to the hotel, but it's also up to the individual to be cognizant of how their dog will behave under some circumstances such as that. Now, my dog would probably be okay unattended in a hotel room, but I have attended conventions where there's a lot of people and a lot of dogs, and people have left their dogs unattended, and they have been very disruptive. On buses or in taxi cabs, the dog may not sit on the seat. Again, the dog should be kept on the floor or on the person's lap, but not on the seat of the bus or the taxi cab. Public accommodations are not required to provide feeding for the dog or any sort of care for the dog. So in cases such as a healthcare facility that is going to do a CAT scan or an MRI or an X-ray, where the dog will not be allowed with the person because of safety reasons, or because they're going through the CAT scan or the MRI, and they're not able to maintain that direct control, a medical facility can exclude the service animal because they're not required to care for the dog or to provide a secure place for the dog. That's up to the handler. So under those circumstances, either I, as a guide dog service animal handler, would either not take my dog with me, or I would have someone go with me to take care of the dog while I was undergoing the procedure. So if an individual is hospitalized and is ambulatory, or can otherwise provide someone who is going to care for the dog, then the dog must be allowed to accompany a patient, an inpatient, in the hospital. The only exceptions would be in such cases where the dog, again, would pose a direct threat. Now, the staff are not the people who should care for the dog. The individual should get someone who is going to be responsible for taking care of that, a friend or a family member. But if a dog poses a direct threat, such as entering into a sterile area, a place where life support equipment is being used, or an isolation area, those are places that can exclude a service animal. Exam rooms are not sterile environments. So if an individual with a disability is accompanied by a service animal and goes into an exam room, those are not sterile environments. I sometimes go and have dermatological surgeries to remove skin cancer, and my dog is laying right next to me while the surgery is taking place because it's done in an exam room. The only sterile environment is the actual field on my body where the surgery is actually taking place. Just because staff can perform the functions that the dog provides, such as guiding a person who is blind or picking up dropped items, does not mean that you can exclude the service animal. And again, we're talking primarily in a healthcare setting. So just because nurses can be called to pick up dropped items or guide a person who is blind, they cannot say you don't need the dog because we'll provide that for you. So the dog should not be excluded under those circumstances. We have specific guidance on our website concerning various different places of public accommodation, offering guidance such as restaurants, hotels, taxi cabs, and healthcare facilities. In fact, one of the great pieces of information we have is a publication from the Centers for Disease Control and Infection. The CDC publishes a manual called Guidelines for Environmental Infection Control in Healthcare Facilities. And there are 2 pages of that are dedicated specifically to the presence of service animals in healthcare facilities, and fundamentally says that the presence of a service dog does not pose a greater risk of infection or disease than does the presence of an individual, and so under most circumstances should not be excluded from a healthcare facility. So you can go to our website, serviceanimals.info, and you can get those specific guidance documents. So if you happen to properly exclude a service animal, because either the service animal is out of control or some way poses a direct threat, you must allow the individual with the disability access to the goods and services of the place of public accommodation without the animal being present.
We have a poll.
We do? Okay.
Yes, Chihuahua.
Oh, okay. Yes, we do. Okay. So we have I missed that in my notes. So we have a poll. Here is a picture of a Chihuahua, and it is barking and showing its teeth. And the question here again is yes, no, or maybe. Is this a service animal? Yes, no, maybe. I think people might be getting the gist of what the answers might be. Yes, no, maybe.
So 13% said yes, 50% said no, and 38% said maybe.
Okay. So the proper answer to this, again, is maybe. Just because the dog is exhibiting this behavior doesn't necessarily mean it's not a service animal, but because it is exhibiting this behavior, you do have the right to exclude it. So my point is that whether it's a service animal or not, if it's out of control and the handler does not take effective action to correct the behavior, or if the animal poses a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by a modification of policies, practices, and procedures, service animal or not, you have the right to exclude it. So my basic guidance when someone says, well, you know, I wasn't really sure if it was a service animal or not, and I kind of thought it wasn't, so I excluded it. What I would say is this: if you're unsure, and the dog is at least under control, whether you believe the person or not that it's a service animal, what I would say is allow the person in. If then you find that the dog is out of control, or it truly does pose a direct threat, then you have the right to exclude it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can protect yourself in a little bit. So again, allergies and fear of animals, though, are not reasons to exclude a service animal. Individuals with disabilities are a protected class, and like many other protected classes such as race, creed, gender, ethnicity, gender expression, those sorts of characteristics are parts of a protected class. And so therefore you cannot discriminate against an individual based upon those characteristics. And the rights of an individual with a disability and the rights of individuals of protected class supersede the rights of others who may have objections to the presence of those people. So for instance, an individual, we're going to stay with disability, who is accompanied by a service animal, and someone says, I don't like that service dog being here. I want that person to move. It's not up to the person with a disability to be relocated. It is up to the person who has the objection. allergies generally do not rise to the level of a disability. In fact, infection control statistics say that the likelihood that an allergy to dog dander rises to the level of a disability is 0.005%. 0.005%. That is 1 in 20,000 people have an allergy so severe to dog dander that it rises to the level of a disability. And under those circumstances, even the presence of dog dander on a person's clothes, the dog doesn't even need to be present. Just the presence of the dander on the clothing would be enough to trigger an allergic reaction. So let's talk a little bit about the interaction of the Americans with Disabilities Act with state laws. Every state in the United States has specific laws which prohibit discrimination based upon disability and protect the right of an individual with a disability to be accompanied by a service dog. Under the principle of supremacy, this is a constitutional protection. Under that principle of supremacy, federal law supersedes any state or local laws. So a state is not allowed to make a law which violates the federal law. They can make laws which are more permissive, but they cannot make laws that are more restrictive. So exactly how does that play out? I'll give you a couple of real life examples. In the state of Virginia, there is a law that says that individuals with disabilities who are hard of hearing and have a service animal that mitigates that impairment must have their dog on a blaze orange collar and leash. The Americans with Disabilities Act says no specific gear can be required as identification of a service animal. So that blaze orange leash and collar is an unenforceable provision in Virginia state law because it violates the federal law. In the state of North Carolina, the businesses are allowed to ask for identification and documentation, and North Carolina actually has a service animal registry. Businesses cannot ask for identification and deny access to individuals who refuse to present that identification. Individuals who do not wish to register their service animals still have all the rights and responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So those laws are unenforceable under the ADA. Now, there are some states that are more permissive. For instance, there is one state, I believe it's Wisconsin, but don't quote me on that, but there are a couple of states who have laws that were compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act prior to March 15th of 2015. On that date is when the Department of Justice issued their new implementing regulations and changed the definition of a service animal from a service animal as any animal individually trained to do work or perform tasks to is only a dog. So those states which have more permissive regulations and laws, those offer greater protections, not more restrictive protections. So in those states, the laws then do allow individuals to be accompanied by animals other than dogs. So that's an example of one law that is more permissive. 37 states have criminal remedies. In 37 states, it is a misdemeanor of some sort. For instance, in Florida, it is a second-degree misdemeanor to prohibit or to discriminate against an individual with a disability accompanied by a service animal. In the state of Florida, violation of the law as a second-degree misdemeanor could result in 60 days imprisonment, a fine of up to $500, and or 30 hours of community service. So it's a criminal statute in the state of Florida and in 37 other states. Well, did I see a question that was posed in chat?
No, I answered.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let's talk about what discrimination is. We've been talking about discrimination, but let's look at what exactly discrimination is. What I want to do is I want to use the example of a restaurant because we can really understand it here. So I go to a restaurant and I go to enter the restaurant and they say, you cannot bring your dog in here. That is what is known as a denial of benefit. Okay, they're actually denying me the right to access the goods and services of the business. So that's one form of discrimination. Now, let's say they do let me in, they seat me, but everybody around me is being served and my table is not. So everyone else is getting their food and drink, taking their orders and getting their bills and leaving the restaurant. And I've been sitting there for an hour and I haven't been served. That is what is known as an unequal benefit. Another way is I could enter into the restaurant and everybody's sitting over in a group where the servers are waiting on the tables, and I'm put way back in the corner away from everyone else, usually at a place like by the kitchen or by the bathroom, so that I hear the toilets flushing while I'm eating or the noise in the kitchen. That is, I'm being separated from the rest of the clientele, and that is what is known as a separate benefit. Now, I said that the ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based upon disability. However, people who are not disabled in some circumstances are also protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So let's say I go to a restaurant with 5 of my friends. I have a service dog and all the rest of my friends have no disability. However, the restaurant says, no, you cannot enter into this restaurant with that service dog. Then my 5 friends are also not going to be allowed in. Well, they would be allowed in perhaps, but they're not going to go in because we all went as a party together to that restaurant. And so that is what is known as discrimination by association. And those 5 individuals also have a right to file a complaint under the Americans with Disabilities Act because they were discriminated against because of their association with me. We talked about Title V. Title V has some miscellaneous provisions, and one of the provisions in Title V is that it is discriminatory to retaliate against an individual who protects their rights or an individual who assists in the protection of a disabled person's rights. So if I go to a hotel and one of you who are not disabled see that I am being discriminated against because of my service animal, and you step in and say, wait, you can't do this, and you help to defend my rights, and they say, okay, well, you're being a pain, we're not going to give you a room either. So that is retaliating against you because you have supported me in the defense of my civil rights. Disabled individuals do have the right to refuse accommodations. So if, again, in a hotel, we're put onto a pet-friendly floor, we can say, no, we don't want to be on a pet-friendly floor. We go to a zoo and they say, you can't bring your service dog in here. We're going to provide you with a sighted guide since we're not going to allow your service dog. You have the right, we have the right to refuse that accommodation. So what happens if a complaint is filed against a business and the business is found to have violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, there are different types of what are known as relief. The primary type of relief that the Department of Justice will impose is what is called an injunctive relief, or an injunction, which is a court order that says you must do something or you must stop doing something. So you must create policies and practices concerning service animals for your business. You must post signs that say service animals are welcome, and you must train your employees on the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are injunctive reliefs. Those are court orders that say you must do or stop doing something. The second thing that could happen is you could be assessed punitive damages. Punitive damages are the fines that you must pay as a result of violating the law. Currently, the Department of Justice has capped the fine for violating the ADA at $75,000. So you could be fined up to $75,000 for the first offense and $150,000 for every offense after that. So those are the punitive damages. The other thing that could be assessed is what they call compensatory damages. Now, compensatory damages refers to compensation to the individual who was aggrieved. And under the ADA, a disabled person is only allowed to get what are called actual damages. So if you deny access to me and I've paid a deposit for my room at a hotel, for instance, and I don't get my deposit back because you're not going to give it back to me because of my service animal, and you deny me the right to have the room, I have a right then to have that money returned to me as my compensatory relief. Another example would be as if a company has a wheelchair ramp that is steeper than allowed by the code of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and as a result, a person using a wheelchair loses control of their chair and is injured, those injuries then are part of compensatory relief. So how can you protect yourself from this? So there are some very practical ways that you can protect yourself. One way, and a very important way, is that you have specific policies, practices, and procedures that you have written and implemented and trained your staff on, so that when a person with a service animal enters into your place of business, those policies and protocol are followed. And if they're followed, you should have no problems. However, let's say that there is an issue and someone comes in and you're going to ask the questions. Is this a service animal required because of a disability, and what tasks or work has the dog been trained to perform? Most businesses have audio video recording at their entrances. And so that audio video recording is a good form of evidence as to why you might have excluded a service animal. Likewise, if you allow someone in and the dog is out of control and you're going to ask them to leave with the dog or take the dog out, you can't deny the person the right to be there, but you're going to approach the person and ask them to remove the dog. Before you do that, take out your smartphone. Take out your smartphone and record what is happening, how the dog is behaving. Record your asking the individual to remove the dog. That recording is going to be evidentiary should that person file a complaint against you. Another way of protecting yourself is through what are known as contemporary notes. Contemporaneous notes are notes that you take at the time or shortly after the incident, which documents what happened and those in most states, state of Florida, I know, in the state of Florida, contemporaneous notes are considered evidentiary in a court of law. So again, should this ever happen and you happen to be a contracted partner with Advocates for Service Animal Partners, we would ask you to contact us while this is happening so that we can offer you guidance and support in your exclusion and also defend you should any complaints be filed. But again, the most important thing that you can do is have some good, sound policies, practices, and procedures and standard operating procedures and train your staff on those provisions. Okay. Okay, so are there any questions or comments at this point in time?
No, there is nothing in chat and nothing in the email.
Okay, as you process this information and you do have questions, please feel free to get in touch with us and we will do the best we can to answer the questions. If you are interested in creating some policies and standard operating procedures and having in-service training, we do offer that to businesses on a fee-for-service basis. So please feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be happy to assist you. So the recording of this program is going to be posted on our website. So if you know of someone who could benefit from it, we will let you know when that recording is posted. If you know someone who wants to watch this presentation later on, or you want to review it at a later point in time, it will be made available on our website, which is Service Animals, plural, serviceanimals.info. Thank you very much. And Marilyn, it's back to you now.
So you will receive an anonymous evaluation form for this webinar by email. Please help us to improve our services by completing this form and returning it to us. And if you would like to support our work, please go to our webpage, serviceanimals.info, and click on the Support Us tab. So one last look, and there is nothing in chat, and there is nothing on the email for questions and answers.
Advocates for Service Animal Partners wants you to know that a service animal is a dog trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability. Disabled individuals accompanied by our service dogs must be allowed in restaurants, hotels, retail stores, healthcare facilities, taxi cabs, or any other place the public is invited. For more information about the rights and responsibilities of service animal handlers and the businesses we patronize, please visit serviceanimals.info.
Very good. Thank you very much, everyone.